Summon the Gods by Melinda Kucsera, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy, Part 3.
Chapter 9. A Tricky Dilemma. Rosalie opened her eyes and stared up at a glowing green string as it dropped onto her face. Above her, darkness covered the sky and everything in between. She hoped enchanted trees surrounded her, but she couldn't tell in the dark. Evarian? She called his name a few more times as she sat up.
"Oh good, you're back. Are you back for good, or is this just a temporary thing?"
asked the snake. Rosalie remembered what the angel Thaniel said, but she didn't have too many other options right now, and that snake might know what happened to Evarian. "Do you know where Evarian is?" Because he wasn't responding, and she couldn't see a damn thing that was more than a few inches above the ground since it was covered by glowing green strings. But somehow they didn't glow enough to light anything else. That was weird, but she could worry about that later after she found Evarian.
"I don't know what became of him. When you disappeared, I left this plane to get some rest until I sensed your return. I found another snake to talk to you through, so don't freak out if I slither closer and don't look the same."
I can't promise that. Indeed, Rosalie flinched as a coppery snake slithered out of the shadows and over the glowing green threads surrounding her.
"Look, if the snake thing bothers you, then let me in. I don't have to use a snake as my familiar. You're a witch, and I am too. I can use you instead. Then you don't have to talk to a snake, since that obviously bothers you."
Now the snake sounded cross, but its reptilian face didn't show any emotion at all as it flicked its tongue. Maybe it was tasting the air? Rosalie froze at that suggestion. That would certainly solve the talking to the snake problem, but should she let the stranger into her mind? What will that do to me?
"Nothing. I have no designs on you whatsoever. I just want you to fix things. Hopefully when you do, that will give me the answer to solve my problem. I have no other goals but that. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to prove that to you either."
That sounded good to Rosalie, but the angel's warning gave her pause. "Can I think this over?"
"Of course. Find your friend, then we'll talk."
The snake slithered back into the shadows. She couldn't tell if she angered it from its tone. Okay, now she needed to find Evarian, but that shouldn't be too difficult. Rosalie sat up and gathered up the glowing threads near her. Thank God, tons of them surrounded her, and they were the residue of earth magic, which was exactly what she needed right now. Earth magic was the absolute best base to use for a finding spell, and she needed the most powerful finding spell she could weave. As Rosalie wove the threads into a glowing rope, she fixed her goal in her mind. Find Evarian. I bind you to that one task. Find my friend Evarian. Wherever he went, whether it's near or far, show me his tracks. Lead me to him. It took a long while to weave the spell because her mind kept drifting to other questions. Where am I? Did I return to the same place in time, or did I end up somewhere else? Thaniel didn't care about any of that, so she could have sent her anywhere. I could be back in my time. Rosalie remembered the angel asking where she belonged. I never answered her. Each time her mind wandered, Rosalie had to start over, weaving the spell again. After the third try, she gave up. Am I still in the same time period? Rosalie waited for the snake to answer her, but only silence came. Did that snake abandon me? I guess I'm on my own. Rosalie suppressed a sigh. That didn't bother her as much as it probably should have. As much as she hated to admit it, she and her mother had a lot in common. They were both loners at heart. Rosalie unbraided the magical strings and started the spell again. This time, she kept her mind firmly on her goal. Find Evarian. I bind you to that one task. Find my friend Evarian. Wherever he went, whether it's near or far, show me his tracks. Lead me to him. When the spell completed, the braid twisted to the right, signaling that Evarian was somewhere over there. In the dark, she couldn't tell whether that was east or west or something else, and she didn't care. Rosalie hoped he was okay as she strode away from here. Only time would tell, and it was her enemy right now. How long do I have to find him before I fade away again? That question gnawed at her as she hiked onward. Rosalie had no way to answer that question because she didn't know where or when she was. I suppose if I fade away again, then that would answer the question. It would also mean she was still in a time before she was born.
Evarian opened his eyes, and a blurry room took shape around him. Branches tied together to form a sloping roof over his head, and for a moment he thought he was home again, in the treehouse he grew up in.
"Here, drink this. You need to replenish yourself,
said a woman, but she wasn't Rosalie. Where's Rosalie? Ivarian pushed the cup away and glanced around for her. More branches formed the walls around the bed he lay on. Didn't she come with me?
There was no one with you when we found you.
The woman tried to hand him the cup again. She had a kind face and eyes, but she wasn't Rosalie. Was Rosalie still in that frozen tundra by the arrow of time? He couldn't remember if she fell with him. He just remembered wrapping his arms around her and tugging her with him. What if she couldn't come? She wasn't a demigod like him, nor did she have any time magic. What if only he could go back in time? I have to go back for her. Ivarian grabbed a handful of the sheet covering him and tried to pull it back, but he had no strength in his arms. Why am I so weak?
You're weak because you're sick and worn down from using too much magic. You need to drink this broth and rest.
The woman pressed the bowl into his hands again. He can't rest. I have to find Rosalie, but his cold fingers closed around the cup and soaked in its warmth. Maybe he should sip it. He'd need all his strength to find Rosalie. Ivarian brought the cup to his lips and tipped it back, emptying its warm, salty contents into his mouth. He swallowed it down, and the broth slid like a warm weight into his belly. Can you send someone out to look for her? She's shorter than me, but she has long hair, and she's so lovely and strong. Ivarian tried to recall some other details about her, as the woman took the cup and refilled it from a pitcher on a table behind her. He couldn't remember what Rosalie wore the last time he saw her, other than it was a dress. What color was it?
There were footprints near where you were found, but we didn't find anyone with you.
The woman handed him the cup again. Then someone must have grabbed her. You have to look for her.
If she's out there, then she'll run into the scouts or the hunters. Don't worry, we'll find her.
The woman patted his shoulder, but the woman didn't sound like she believed it. She was just saying that to calm him down. Where could Rosalie be? Where am I? Ivarian handed the empty cup back to her. He was so full, and his eyes sagged from exhaustion.
Don't worry about that right now. You need to rest. I'll be back with some more broth in a few hours. Please, get some sleep.
The woman took the cup and walked out before he could ask anything else, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his worries. Where are you, Rosalie? Why didn't they find you with me? His mind went in 100 different directions, inventing this or that foe or calamity that could have befallen her until weariness finally pulled him down into sleep. Maybe she'd be there when he woke up.
Rosalie followed where the spell of intertwined threads led, but by morning she still hadn't found Ivarian. Some threads had winked out and fallen to the ground as gray and lifeless as last year's leaves to become dirt under her feet, because all things returned to the earth in the end. Rosalie sat beneath a tree and braided more glowing green threads into the spell to renew it and its purpose. Where are you, Ivarian? She walked all night, and now exhaustion weighed her down and hunger cramped her belly. A stream burbled nearby. When she finished with the spell, she located the stream and knelt beside it so she could scoop up handfuls of water to cool her burning throat. How much further until I find you? There was no answer. The spell she wove couldn't talk back, so it couldn't tell her anything. It could just point toward Ivarian, leaving her to follow where it led. And that was frustrating, because searching for him took her away from her goal. Leaves rustled nearby. Are you there, Snake? Rosalie didn't glance away from the stream and the water dripping off her hands.
That's not my name,
Said the snake, and it sounded cross. I know that, but you still haven't told me your name, so I don't know what to call you. Rosalie splashed water on her face, but that didn't wake her up. Instead, she yawned so wide her jaw cracked. Ugh, I need to sleep. But she didn't have time for that now.
I've had a lot of names over the centuries, but the one I like best is the one I'll give you, but not right now, because I don't like the way it sounds coming from a snake's mouth.
A matte black snake slithered out of the shadows. Can you help me find my friend? Rosalie splashed more water on her face. That still didn't help, but the water felt cool on her skin.
I don't know. You don't have any ties to him that I could use, but I could help you in other ways if you let me in.
Rosalie probably shouldn't consider that offer, but she was tired of hiking around and not finding what she sought. Worse still, she didn't know how much time she had to find Ivarian and figure out where and when they were, and hunt for clues to what broke the timeline. I can't lose sight of my goal, but she was starting to, and that must stop, or she'd never fix anything. Rosalie blinked as her hand faded until she could see right through it. Oh no, not again.
I can stop that.
The snake slithered closer. How? Ivarian's not here. I can't bind myself to his time magic if he's not here to bind myself to. Rosalie stared at her hand and willed it to become opaque and solid again, but the fade traveled up her arms instead.
I thought of another way.
What is it? Rosalie glanced away from her fading hand. Dare she hope this was a better way? Because she didn't like any of the options the snake offered before. Thaniel's warning about not trusting snakes ghosted back to her, but she ignored it. She didn't have the luxury of time. Sometimes necessity made strange bedfellows.
You're not born yet, but if your mother is alive at this time, then we could use her to keep you here. The bond between a mother and her daughter is very strong, and it's even stronger when both are witches.
The snake stopped barely an inch from her booted foot. Rosalie could have kicked it if she wanted to, but that was a promising idea. If she could connect with her mother in some way, then she could maybe find out what year they ended up in. How would that work?
You need to let me in, and you must become my new focus. I'd see and experience the world through you instead of the snake, and through you, I could work some magic.
The snake reared up so its round eyes were level with hers. That didn't sound like a bad thing. Will that change me in any way? Rosalie couldn't look away from the snake's black eyes.
No, I don't have any sort of mind magic. I weave magic threads just like you do, and occasionally work some blood magic when that's not enough to do the job.
The snake swayed, and her eyes followed it. If you don't have any mind magic, then how are you speaking to me through a snake? Thaniel's warning repeated in her head again, but Rosalie ignored it. She couldn't fix the future if she didn't take some risk, and this sounded like a risk worth taking.
I'm not using my magic to do that. I was never human. I was something else, and as part of that, I can speak through other beings and use them as my focus, but I'm limited in what I can use for that. Unfortunately for you, snakes are one creature I can use, but your country doesn't have a lot of snakes, so I'm running out of creatures to use to communicate with you.
I need to rest. I can't decide right now. Rosalie rubbed her face and yawned. When I wake up, we'll talk. She shoved some leaves into a pile and collapsed on it.
You'll fade away and go back to the gray between if you wait until then to decide, and I shouldn't have to remind you that you can only go to the gray between 3 times before it keeps your soul. You can't come back after that 3rd trip.
Rosalie vaguely remembered something about that from her religious instruction. Ugh, what are you saying? She asked around another yawn.
You already went there once. Someone must call you back if you go there a 2nd or 3rd time. Then that's it. You get 3 strikes, then you're dead. And I think you should save those other 2 times for something important, like a serious illness or a catastrophic wound, not for something you already have a solution for. Let me anchor you.
The snake slithered onto her bed of leaves. I don't have a choice, do I? Rosalie watched her hand vanish, followed by her arms and both her feet. Her body disappeared faster this time. Was that because it was the 2nd time the gray between came to claim her? I'm being a fool. The snake is right. I need to stay here. Rosalie willed the fade to stop, but it didn't. If she didn't act fast, she'd be nothing but a floating head in a moment. All right, what do I need to do?
You agree to host me temporarily?
The snake slithered closer until they were snout to nose. Rosalie nodded. Yes, on my word as a witch, I agree. Just hurry up already before I disappear completely.
Then repeat after me. The circle binds us, sisters, witches, weavers of old magic, bled through life until we're dead and nothing more than magic threads. Take my body and through my eyes see what lies between the magical and the mundane.
The snake flicked its rough tongue over her face. Rosalie repeated her words. I hope this works, and I don't regret this.
So mote it be, by the witch's decree.
The snake vibrated, and light blinded Rosalie. She knew nothing more for a while. Chapter 10. The Threads We Weave. Rosalie opened her eyes, and the world wasn't gray or covered in the low, dense fog. That was an improvement, especially since too many trips to that benighted place could be fatal. A black-haired woman leaned over her and extended her hand, but it wasn't her supernaturally beautiful face that caught her eye. Your eyes are violet, just like that angel's, and she wore white robes too. Rosalie didn't know what to make of that. The woman smiled.
Yes, they are. It's a common color among my kind. Here, take my hand.
Rosalie clasped it, and the woman pulled her to her feet. Are you an angel? The woman sighed.
That's a long story, but you don't have time to hear it right now.
Right. I need to find a Varian, but she also needed a name for this woman. Would she get in trouble if she asked that? Rosalie didn't think so, since she'd already asked and the woman refused to say once already. What do I call you?
I suppose you can call me Layla. When you've existed as long as I have, you pick up a lot of names, but I actually like that one, so let's go with Layla.
Her smile didn't waver, so perhaps she did like the name. Either that or she was an excellent liar. All right, Layla, how do we stop this fading thing so I can find my friend? Rosalie waved to her hand as it flickered in and out of view in a disconcerting manner. She could still feel her hand, just not see it all the time, and that was strange.
We'll get to that, but we need to find your mother first.
Layla cupped her hands together and a glowing stone appeared.
Will you look into the shoe stone?
What's a shoe stone? Rosalie peered at the stone, but it didn't look all that impressive.
Sorry, that's the old name for it. I think you'd call it a scrying stone, a seeing stone, or a far viewer. Actually, I'm not sure what witches in your time call it. I've been out of touch for a long time.
Layla offered the crystal to her again. What will I see? Rosalie clasped her hands together to keep from taking the crystal ball.
Someone who needs your help more urgently than your boyfriend.
Layla grimaced. He's not my boyfriend. Rosalie kicked a stone, and it ricocheted off an enchanted tree. Branches moved, but she backed away. Sorry, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was just taking my frustration out on a rock, and you got in the way. Lesson learned, though. No kicking stones in the forest, not where it could hit an enchanted tree anyway.
He will be. Mark my words.
Layla dropped the crystal. Rosalie caught it on impulse. One didn't let magical objects break if one could help it. That was a lesson every fledgling magic user learned. And she didn't want years of bad luck if that magical thing broke. All because she didn't catch it. Inside the crystal, a heavily pregnant woman picked herself up off the muddy ground, and she stared back at Rosalie with murder in her determined brown eyes as she wiped mud from her cheek. Rosalie almost dropped the crystal. Why does she look like me with shorter hair? There was the obvious answer, of course, but Rosalie shied away from it because it was just too unbelievable, even though she'd seen that determined look so many times before. Mom had an iron will, and the world would break before she did.
She's your mother, so you should look something like her.
Layla shoved her hands into the pockets of her robe. Where is she? Rosalie glanced around like the woman in the crystal might pop out from behind an enchanted tree and greet her with open arms.
She's not too far away, actually.
Will that affect the future if I find her and help her? After all, her mom was tough enough to walk out of an abusive relationship while pregnant. Rosalie clutched the crystal to her chest. It was like a small pumpkin in size and weight, and she didn't want to drop it.
Not if you already helped her.
Layla shrugged. Mom never mentioned anyone helping her. Then again, Mom never talked about the time between leaving home at 17 and my birth, so that wasn't proof either. Rosalie gripped the seeing stone as indecision gripped her. Is what I saw happening now?
Yes, that's how seeing stones work.
Layla leaned against an enchanted tree. Well, that answered one question anyway. We ended up almost 4 years before we wanted to arrive. That was better than arriving too late, but it put her in an awkward situation. She should find Avarian and nurse him back to health so they could move up the timeline to sometime closer to when everything went wrong. But her gaze drifted back to the crystal and the fierce woman who brought her into this world. Mom upended baskets and chests as she rooted around for things, then stuffed them into a familiar rucksack. What if I can't find the event that changed my life? I can't leave without seeing you. I miss you, Mom. Rosalie brushed away a tear. How do I find her?
You weave a finding spell.
Layla toed the glowing threads littering the ground. How do I explain why I look just like her? She's probably the same age as me, but she was an only child, so I can't claim I'm her long-lost sister. Mom would never believe that anyway. Rosalie bit her lip.
Leave that to me. I can keep her from noticing that.
Where do I take her? She needs a village, with a midwife, preferably one that's close by. She looks about ready to give birth to me. Rosalie stared into the shoe stone.
Take her to where your boyfriend is, then you can keep an eye on both of them.
She won't stay long. Mom's a wanderer at heart, and I think I might be just like her. Rosalie suppressed a sigh at that thought.
That's not your concern. She'll be on her own when you leave anyway.
Right. Mom's an adult. Rosalie crouched while still cradling the shoe stone in one arm and gathered the glowing strings for another finding spell since the previous one had winked out.
Here, I'll take that. You need to weave that spell since I'm not really here on this plane and you are.
Layla extended her hand to take the shoe stone. Rosalie clutched it to her chest. She couldn't part with it, not yet, but she couldn't weave the finding spell while holding it either. She needed 2 hands for that. I'm coming, Mom. You won't know it's me, but I'll know. You just try not to murder anyone until I find you, okay? Rosalie had no hope that her mom would comply with that wish, since Ran wasn't around to make it come true. But she glanced into the crystal ball at her mom one more time. She balled up items and chucked them into bags. So maybe she'd stay put for a while. Rosalie held the shoe stone out to Layla with shaking hands, and she took it with one hand.
I'll hold on to this. You can look at it again whenever you want. It'll be right here in my pocket.
Layla slid the shoe stone into her pocket, but her pocket didn't bulge or sag or do anything to betray a pumpkin-sized crystal resting in it. Rosalie glanced away and busied her hands and her mind with the spell. She wove those threads and beat their magic into a finding spell her mom would be proud of. Soon it was twice as long as the one she made to find Avarian, and the braid yanked her out of her crouch and into a run as it flew toward her mother as directed. Time seemed to stop as she ran under the enchanted tree. trees. Maybe they felt the urgency of her errand, because the trees shifted their roots out of the way and bushes stepped aside, so she ran on level ground.
There's a faster way, you know.
Layla appeared beside her, but she wasn't running. She floated like a cloud, probably because she didn't have a corporeal body. After all, she was sharing her mind. Tell me, Rosalie felt that urgency too. She needed to find her mom now.
The witches of old didn't run around like a child playing with magic strings. They rode in style.
Layla made a sweeping gesture with her arms, but that didn't enlighten Rosalie. What are you saying? Rosalie wished she could get a straight answer out of just one person. Glowing green threads wove into the ends of the braid, extending it until it was as long as a broom handle and just as wide. The ground disappeared under her feet, and she held on as the braid angled upward, dragging her with it.
The old tales were mistaken. Witches didn't ride brooms. They rode the spells they wove. Ride the braid, girl, and off you go.
Layla laughed, and her laughter was like the tinkling of bells. This is all well and good to get me there quickly, but how do I get down when I find my mother? Rosalie glanced at the ground, then wished she didn't. The tops of enchanted trees sailed past beneath her.
Just let go. An enchanted tree will catch you. After all, one of their 3 rules prevents harm.
Layla shrugged like that was no big deal. Maybe not for her, but she was immortal. Rosalie felt all too mortal and fragile as she clung to a braid as thick as her wrist. What about you?
I'm still with you, but I'll be a bodiless voice in your ear for a long while. It's too draining to manifest even a ghost of myself for long.
Layla faded as she spoke. Thank you. Rosalie just realized she didn't thank the immortal for helping her. No matter what ulterior motives Layla had, and she had some, they didn't conflict with Rosalie's goals. Not yet anyway, and she hoped that would continue.
No thanks are necessary. I look after my own. Now focus on your goal. The more you concentrate, the faster the spell will fly, and the sooner you can get back to your man.
Layla disappeared. You know, there's no way Mom will let me fly her around like this. Rosalie laughed at the thought, then whooped with joy at the wind in her hair and the sheer joy of flying.
I won't tell her if you don't.
Are you saying you can make her think we're walking? Rosalie gaped at the implications. How powerful was Layla?
Well, no, I can't do that since that would require mind magic, and I don't have any. But she could rest a while, and you could carry her while she does that. Then she wouldn't know anything other than what you tell her.
Well, that was one idea, but Rosalie didn't like it. Mom didn't nap, and she doubted even something like pregnancy could change that. Mom was a force to be reckoned with, but Rosalie kept quiet about that because her accomplice would soon find out how stubborn Robin of Larkspur could be.
Chapter 11. Chasing an Army. Which way is the army going? It was probably headed to the gateway. That was the only destination that made sense, but this was hell, and the unexpected ruled here. Garen waited for a reply and tried not to badger the Versati when impatience sawed at his last nerve.
I can't tell, but it's definitely headed this way.
Natali grabbed his arm, and energy flowed back into him. Maybe I can tell. After all, I led plenty of armies in my day. Garen opened his eyes and risked losing his mind to the gateway's manipulative magic again when he peered over the rubble pile. Rank upon rank of demons marched down a street perpendicular to the street they were on.
Come on, we need to go.
Natali pulled him along when the Versati crouched and walked behind the rocks to the ruins of a building on the other side of the street. Wait, we need to get to the roof of a building so I can get my bearings and check which road leads to the library. Garen couldn't see its tall walls or its towers behind all the buildings surrounding them, not with the sky constantly changing between darkness and light, confusing his eyes.
Come on, if we go now and we're quick and quiet and we stay in the shadows, we can creep from one pile of rocks and things to another, then into that building over there.
Natali pointed at a building that stood perhaps 4 stories tall. All its windows blew out, and something ripped off the facade on the side facing the gateway, leaving apartments on this side of the building open to hell. A stairway at the other end of the building wound between floors, and it looked like it was still intact. Since that's what they needed, Garen nodded. That building would do. Then, let's go. Garen crawled to keep his head below the rubble littering the street. I hope that army isn't headed to the library. That would only make what he intended to do much more difficult than it needed to be. But everything was hard since he agreed to sneak into that library and steal the Book of Names. Just thinking about that thing made the tattoo of the book flutter its wings against his skin, and That was enough to get him moving. He didn't want to fight with that darn thing again, but he might need to before this was over. Garen surveyed the city from the roof, or he tried to anyway. That damned gateway kept grabbing his attention and pulling his gaze to it. The gateway split into 3 copies, then merged back into one at regular intervals, and that meant something, but he couldn't figure out what. Too bad the gateway couldn't tell him either. Those fallen angels hadn't moved. Maybe they waited for the army to arrive, or perhaps they were also trying to figure out why the gateway kept acting so strangely. He'd never seen a gateway split or 2 gateways merge before. Mentali tapped his shoulder.
The army is over there.
She pointed at a dust cloud. A fiery streak flew above the army.
What is that?
It could be a fire demon, or a fallen angel on fire, or anything, really. This is hell, after all. Fire is more common than dirt here. Garen tried to keep his eyes fixed on the army, but his gaze slid toward the gateway again. Damn it, I need to focus on that army. Garen turned his back on the gateway, and it felt like a large creature stared at his back. I must be imagining that. The gateway isn't alive. It can't glare at me just because I looked away. The gateway might look like a giant eye, but it wasn't one. No creature looked through it at him. Why am I thinking about the gateway like it's a living thing? I must be losing my mind. While he did that, the army marched closer. 7 fallen angels with gold halos around their necks broke free from the army's main body, and they ran toward the gateway at 3 or 4 times the speed of the demons behind them. They'd reach it soon if the rubble in their path didn't stop them. As they neared it, they unsheathed their smoking swords. 3 fallen angels jumped over the large chunks of masonry flung by the shockwave generated by the gateway opening, while 4 others hurried to remove the debris from the army's path. But some chunks were too large for them to move, even with help from the forerunners. The army split and turned down a side street to try another avenue. Since this part of the city was a grid, it wouldn't take them long to reach the gateway. Half had gone left around the debris blocking the road, and half had gone right. Mentali tapped on his shoulder again.
Did you figure out which way we need to go to reach the library?
No, he didn't. But he'd do that now before the gateway grabbed his wandering attention again. He didn't bother saying so as he turned to take in the skyline, because that was obvious. Thankfully, the library's 4 towers were easy to spot from this vantage point. It's right there. It was Garen's turn to point at something. If we took the road where the gateway stands straight out of the city and across the plain, we'll reach the library. Arjanil could probably see the gateway from his tower. That wasn't a comforting thought, not when he could still feel that fallen angel's talons wrapped around his ankle. Garen shifted his weight from foot to foot. Natali healed that wound, but a phantom pain made his ankle ache.
We'd better go now before that army arrives.
Natali reached for his arm, but he dodged. Hold on. Shouldn't we wait and see what happens when the army reaches the gateway? The fallen angel who runs the library might want to know. He probably didn't, but Garen kept his doubts to himself, since he wanted the information. Arjanil didn't care about anything beyond the walls of his library. He made that quite clear on Garen's last visit.
I think you're stalling because you want to look at that gateway some more.
And Tali folded their arms and glared at him. They were right, but he didn't want to admit it as he stared at the gateway for a few moments before the first ranks of demons reached it. Of course, they marched on through the gateway like it was nothing more than another street, when it was actually a magical tunnel that punched through all the realms in between its 2 endpoints. The fiery streak resolved into a fallen angel with fiery wings, and he hovered over the gateway like he owned it. But the other half of the army didn't turn the corner and join the rest of its legions. Instead, it marched right past that turn and headed toward the edge of the city. Where the hell is it going? There was only one logical destination it could have, but that army couldn't possibly be headed toward the library too. Garen glared at it, willing the army to turn around and head back to the gateway, but it didn't.
We need to go now.
Natali grabbed his arm and towed him toward the stairwell leading back down to the ground floor. It's no use. We waited too long. Garen tried to pull his arm free as he passed the Versati.
And whose fault is that?
Natali shoved him when he stopped in the stairwell. It's mine, okay? I made us wait too long because I couldn't stop looking at the gateway. Are you happy now that I've admitted it? Garen glared at Natali over his shoulder. The Versati glared right back.
I'm not happy. I want to go to the library to fetch the creator of the Book of Names, so we can go to the sleeping angel like you promised.
How can we possibly do that when there's an army between us and the library?
Well, you were a war god once. I'm sure you'll think of something.
Natalie patted his shoulder and then shoved him to get him moving. But he didn't want to find a way past the army. He wanted to go to the gateway. It called to him, and he stared through the blown-out windows at the other end of the floor. What waited on its other side? Might there be a world waiting for him to conquer it? Garen couldn't get that question out of his mind. He must go to the gateway and find out. Without realizing what he was doing, he stumbled over the collapsed stones and broken furniture toward the gaping hole in the outer wall and the gateway glowing in the center of the intersection until a hand landed on his shoulder, and all his energy drained into it. The ground rose to meet him, and Natalie towered over him. The Versace leaned close and whispered in his ear,
I won't let you go to the gateway. You'll keep your promise even if you must fight your way through an army to do it. Do you hear me? Answer me.
Natalie shook him. I hear you. Garen glanced away from it. The gateway wasn't so attractive anymore. Not since the Versace challenged him. Could I fight my way through an army of demons, led by fallen angels of unknown power? The question fired him up like nothing else in hell had. He didn't need the Versace to return his energy. Curiosity mingled with excitement and vibrated through him as he sat up. Could I take on an army and win?
See that gleam in your eyes. What are you thinking?
Natalie touched his forehead in between his eyes with a gloved finger. His plan had a large hole in it. Natalie probably couldn't fight their way through an army. After all, they weren't a war god once upon a time, and he couldn't win this challenge unless he brought them to the library. Can you fly? Or can you sprout wings? After all, you're a shapeshifter. And he certainly wasn't anything of the sort. Garen didn't see any wings on the Versace, but who knew what hid under their shapeless robes?
No, can you?
Natalie folded their arms. No, but I could teleport before I lost most of my power. I just can't anymore. But that was then, and this was now. They could fall in behind the army. No one would notice them. But they wouldn't reach the library before the army if they did that, because it was a straight shot from here to the library. Could I fight my way through an army before he lost his powers? Hell yes. What about now? Could I do it without most of my powers? Garen didn't know, but he damn well would find out. Once thought, that question buzzed around his head like a fly. It wouldn't go away until he answered it. Garen ran down the remaining steps to the first floor without a backward glance.
Where are you going?
Natalie hurried after him. To fight an army. Garen grinned as he shot out of the building and ran after the army.
Are you crazy? You can't fight an army. They'll tear you to pieces.
Natalie chased him, but they were shorter than he was, with correspondingly shorter legs that kept them from catching up. Yes, I can, and I might even win. Garen felt as light as the air above him as he ran. The idea possessed him as he charged down the street after the army. If I defend the library, then its protector will have to come out and talk to me.
You're insane.
Then Telly shouted from behind him, but they didn't stop.
Chapter 12. To Battle.
Well, shall we go meet the demons headed this way?
Daniel turned to face him and smiled. We should, but Arginil didn't rise. He just sat there staring at the angel reflected in the mirror across from him. That can't be me. But the angel in the reflection touched his halo when Arginil did. And he tugged on it too, but the halo refused to budge. It floated 6 inches above his head, like it did before the fall. How's that even possible? Arginil let go and his hands slid down his dark hair to rest in his lap again. Nathaniel might be right about a glamour, but who cast it? Did I do it and then forget? Arginil stared at his reflection, but it couldn't answer that question, and neither could he. He just didn't know. His memories of the time right before he jumped into that dark tunnel that led to hell were a jumbled mess, but he needed to sort them out, and he dreaded that. What if someone else cast that glamour on me? That was a chilling thought. Arginil shivered at the implications. Was I just a pawn in a larger game?
Why don't I go down and deal with them while you come to terms with everything?
Daniel squeezed his shoulder. No, I'm coming with you. I was a warrior-class angel like you. Arginil rose, and his legs held him up despite the shock still working its way through his system.
Maybe you were, but your heart was never in it. And there's no shame in that. We can't all enjoy the same things. It's too bad the council formed after you left. There are more jobs than angels to fill them now. At least it seems that way sometimes.
Danielle patted his shoulder, then headed for the door. I'm still coming with you. I cast a shield before you arrived, and it'll help, but I don't know if it'll keep out an army. Arginil followed her.
And that's why I think they misclassified you.
Danielle walked down the stairs. She was as light as a feather on the stone steps and barely made a sound.
I couldn't cast a shield, even if the creator himself ordered me to do it. That's just not in my skill set.
Arjaniel nearly tripped over his own feet. What are you saying?
What you've always known. Yes, you can fight, but that's not what lights you up.
Daniel said from somewhere below. No, it's not. Arjaniel glanced at the ink pot and the quill on his desk. They called him. If he could just write for a while, he could make sense of everything. But now wasn't the time, so he followed Thaniel down the spiral stone staircase.
How do I get outside? I don't think you want me to make a hole in the wall and jump through it.
No, I'll show you. Arjaniel hurried to catch up to her. Thaniel waited on the next landing and gestured for him to precede her.
Lead the way.
It's this way, follow me. As Arjaniel passed her on the landing, he squared his shoulders and felt more in control. This was his sanctuary, and he wouldn't let it fall, no matter what happened. And I won't fall either, not this time. Later, he'd revisit the events that led to his arrival here and figure out what really happened. Arjaniel exited the staircase and almost ran into the demons gathered there. He threw an arm out to stop Thaniel, but she pushed his arm aside.
I know they're your staff. Don't worry, I won't hurt them. I'll just hurt the demons that want to break in here. You don't care about them, right?
Thaniel glanced at him as she passed by. No, I don't. He only gave the demons gathered in front of him sanctuary, and he regretted that since they all stared at him like they'd never seen him before. Well, to be honest, they hadn't, not looking like this. Angels were beautiful and bright, and now, so was he again. The demons stepped back and shielded their eyes until he remembered how to dim his halo and glowing eyes. There was a mental switch for that, and it took some fumbling before he located it. Sorry, I didn't mean to blind you. I forgot how bright we can get. He gestured to Thaniel. That broke the silence, and everyone talked at once about his transformation. What do I say about it? All that sprang to mind was the truth, but he couldn't get the words out. They felt like a lie. How could I not have fallen? But the mirror didn't lie. Arjaniel touched his halo again. It still floated over his head just like the last 5 times he checked it, and it wouldn't do that if he didn't still have every ounce of grace he had before the fall. Antares stepped forward and quieted everyone by patting the air in front of him. Somehow that worked to stop the questions a dozen demons had.
You look different. You'll certainly give a fallen angel pause.
Antares wanted to ask the question on all their minds, but he was too polite.
This isn't a glamour. This is real. What you saw before was the glamour. He really looks like that.
Daniel caught Arjaniel's hand and tried to spin him around to show off the transformation, but he pulled his hand free. It shocked me too. Arjaniel couldn't say this didn't change anything because it changed everything. I could go back to heaven. Would its gates open for him? I can't think about that now. I need to save the library. And then he didn't know what he'd do. But right now he had a job to do, and he would do it, so he didn't need to think about anything else for a while. You always knew you differed from other fallen angels. That's why you built the library, said a small voice in the back of his mind. It was true, but he couldn't think about that now or he'd go mad. We need to go. There's an army coming toward the library. Arjaniel stepped forward and the demons parted. There was respect, awe, and a little fear in their eyes, and he almost tripped over his feet. Why are they afraid of me? Antares raised a clawed hand.
There's an army outside, yes, but they're there because you told me to send them out there.
Oh, right, I forgot about them. What did you tell them? Arjaniel didn't need to see Thaniel's face. He felt her glare burning through his shoulder. She probably wasn't doing that, but it felt like it.
You have a demon army?
Daniel grabbed his arm and turned him to face her. No! Arjaniel yanked his arm free.
They're not an army. They're more like a ragtag group who came here expecting a reward if they did something for us, but our plans changed.
And Terry stopped talking when Arjaniel glared at him, but he might as well confess. They came because I sent word out for them to come. It doesn't matter why, because the reason never came to pass. But now they're here. I don't want to send them to the city because they might go through the gateway, but I don't want them here either. Arjaniel rubbed his face. He didn't know what to do with them, to be honest.
Well, they're here now, so we might as well put them to work, right?
Daniel squeezed his shoulder. What do you want them to do? Why was she so understanding about this? Arjaniel let his hand fall back to his side so he could see her face. Thaniel furrowed her brow in thought. What was she plotting?
They could fight for the library. I could lead them. That would be fun, actually. I've never led a demon army before. I wonder what that'll be like.
Daniel stared off like she was trying to imagine it. Why wasn't she appalled?
Let's go. This is sounding more and more like it'll be a great time.
Thaniel shoved him toward a narrow aisle in between two shelving units of books. You have strange ideas about what's fun. Arjaniel shook his head, but he led the way.
Maybe to you I do, but you've been down here for over 4,000 years and I just arrived, so it's all shiny and new for me.
4,000 years? Has it really been that long? Arjaniel staggered at the thought.
Yes, outside of hell, about 4,000 years have passed since the last war in heaven in the fall.
Daniel sighed, but she propelled him forward.
And it's been boring ever since then, so let's go end my boredom.
What about us?
Antares called from behind them, "Man the traps. If anyone gets past us, you're our last line of defense." Arjaniel didn't want any of his charges outside where Thaniel could confuse them with an invader. It would be safer for his people if they stayed inside the library. He hoped Antares intuited that from his response, because he couldn't spell that out while Thaniel was listening. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, not after she saved him in more ways than one.
Will do. We won't let anyone through. You can depend on us.
Antares said, and the others echoed it. "I know." Arjaniel glanced over his shoulder at his people before turning a bend. They weren't demons to him, not anymore. They were the lost souls he'd collected along with the powerful artifacts, and he wouldn't lose a single one.
You've been listening to Part 3 of Summon the Gods, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the sequel publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback, and now a full-cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.